All right. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. And I see we've still got some people getting in for today's webinar. So I'm going to give just a couple moments here for people to keep joining us. My name is Brenda Donahue. I'm the IT manager here at CJCA, and I'll be running the webinar from behind the scenes. Before we get started, I just want to let everybody know a couple housekeeping issues. First off, today's PowerPoint presentation and any resources that we mentioned during today's presentation will be available in a follow-up email, and all follow-up emails are generally sent within 48 hours of the webinar end. So any links, resources, the slides themselves, you'll be able to receive those after the fact. Don't worry, they'll be on their way by email. Also for today's webinar, this is a broadcast because of the number of people. We've got almost 200 people on already. With the number of people on, we've got two options for audio today. You can either listen through your computer speakers or you can dial in on the telephone. We do notice when people have echo or problems with the audio, make sure that you've chosen the correct option on the webinar screen. So if you're dialed in on your telephone today, make sure you've chosen the telephone option on the webinar control panel. That will really help reduce any unwanted feedback or echo. We do have, it's a 90-minute session today, and we have 3 panelists on the call in total. So we're going to be holding all our questions until the end of the presentation, but don't hesitate to ask them at any point. You can type your questions here on this webinar control panel at any point throughout the course of the presentation. If you do type them in earlier on, try to reference which one of our panelists so that we know where to direct the question at the end. But again, we'll be holding all questions until the end of the webinar. PowerPoint slides available by email afterwards. And make sure you've got the correct audio option chosen. And if you've done all 3 of those things, you should be just about ready to start with us here today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Dempsey, Executive Director of CJCA. And Mike, why don't you start us off?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Coordinated Assistance to States, also known as the CCAS. Today's webinar, Reducing the Use of Isolation in Youth Facilities, is the first in a series of webinars, and this one today is going to focus on the strategies and lessons learned from the field. My name is Mike Dempsey, and I'm the Executive Director of the Council of Juvenile Correctional Administrators, better known as CJCA. As you heard, Brendan Donahue is our Technology Manager. He is at our office in Braintree, Massachusetts, and he's with the Performance-Based Standards Learning Institute, and he'll be producing today's webinar. Joining us remotely from New York City is Sharon Pete, who is the CJCA Reducing Isolation Project Manager. Joining OJJDP as partners in this initiative are the American Institutes for Research in Washington, D.C., and the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform at Georgetown University. Juvenile justice systems to the benefit of the youth who are placed in our care. The focus of the center is on providing ongoing coaching to achieve individual and/or behavioral changes that positively impact the juvenile justice systems across the country. Today's learning objectives, our first objective is to increase knowledge about the impact isolation has on youth facility residents. The second time a youth is physically and/or socially isolated isolation can make facilities by youth corrections and detention jurisdictions.
So really talking about is we are talking about changing is the importance of leadership in organizational transformation. First of all, and this is about all of us, all of the nearly 200, and now I see about 240 of us who are on this webinar are leaders in one way or another in our organization. And in order to move this new mindset through the organization, we all have to understand the impetus and the reasons for change. And before we expect our people in the organization to understand that, the executive leadership of the organization needs to understand it and needs to be able to explain it to others. We, as the leaders of the organization, need to embrace the change that we are promoting in our agencies and organizations. We need to be able to explain it to others, perhaps tell people why we are doing this. We need to have a strategy for gradual change that takes us from the old paradigm to the new paradigm. We all know that change does not occur overnight, and it's a process. So I wanted to briefly talk about 5 specific roles for leaders. So these next few slides are modified from a presentation from a paper actually back in 2003 by McKinsey and Company. And I've modified it for this presentation, but I wanted to give them credit. So these are 5 specific things that I believe we need to do in order to be successful in making this shift in mindset and in culture if we want to implement strategies and practices that reduces the use of isolation. First and foremost, we have to be able, as leaders of the organization, to make a human and a business case for change. And what do I mean by that? We have to be able to have a pretty compelling case as to why we need to move to this new paradigm. We need to be able to articulate the human cost of isolating youth. And you all know some of those things that happen with kids and even with adults when we practice isolation or room confinement. As an example, psychological damage, increased suicidal behavior, and ultimately increased suicidal rates. Denial of education and rehabilitation for kids who are locked up 23 hours or even half the day in a locked room without having access to being educated and go through the programming that they need to go to in order to improve their behavior. And finally, slowing down their development. We all know about brain science. We all know that the developmental approach is pretty crucial to taking youth to a place where they do not engage in a life of crime. And the practice of isolation does not help our goal of helping our youth go to a better future. There's also a fiscal impact to the practice that we're doing. Ultimately, if we are basically causing, or perhaps unintentionally causing, these damages to kids, they are going to recidivate, and the cost of future crimes is not quantifiable. So there is a huge monetary impact to the practice of isolation as well, and we need to be able to articulate that. We need to provide a compelling case for accountability and reformation. By reducing the use of isolation, we are not moving away from the concept of accountability. This is pretty important because some of our staff are going to be telling us, this is a practice that you're engaged in order to hold youth accountable. And yet, our strategy is absolutely centered around accountability and yet not punishment. We have to be able to clarify these definitions, these terms, and we need to be able, if we have old definitions, we need to be able to update those. The second strategy for leaders is to engage those who do the work, our frontline staff, in this transformation process. Top-down change that is forced upon organization, and I'll talk about that in a moment, does not work. We've tried that, and we've experienced that it actually backfires. The only way to make a sustainable change in an organization is through understanding and through winning the hearts and minds of those who actually do the work. Otherwise, our staff are a whole lot smarter than us, and they can find many, many workarounds around any policies that we might put in place. As leaders, we need to understand the difference between power and force. What do I mean by that? force is external, and though it can move and shift things, its impact is not permanent. In contrast, power is internal and requires nothing from the outside. If we want to be successful in this process of change, relying on power and not force gets us a whole lot closer to that intention of being successful than otherwise. Leading with power actually allows us to make sustainable and lasting changes that would outlive our longevity in the organization. Leading by force generally results in overturning most changes we've made as soon as we leave the organization. We've seen this with other leaders, even though those changes were good changes. If it's associated with us and if it has been done through the use of force, they're going to fall apart the moment that we leave the organization. The next bullet here is articulating the impact of staff. What does this mean to me if I'm a frontline staff in this organization? How is this going to impact my safety and security? We have a responsibility as leaders to explain this to our staff. And again, this is a point that's repeated through this presentation. We need to allow staff to make the change their own and take pride in the improvements that occur. This is not our strategy as leaders. This is our strategy as an organization, and the staff are actually leading it on the front lines. And we know it doesn't work. As leaders, we have to make the investment to create some tools, offer those tools and the training. And as it comes to adult learning, it doesn't generally happen through reading a book or sitting through a training session. Action learning is how we learn as adults. So we need to basically have modeling of this new behavior on the floor with the staff. In Oregon Youth Authority, what we've done is we've actually developed a cadre of what we call skill development coordinators that work on the floor with the existing staff to show them how we can actually reduce the use of isolation by interacting with staff differently. And you'll hear some great examples of that also from Indiana and Massachusetts. We also need to be realistic that when we engage in a change process, there are going to be setbacks and challenges. This is not going to be smooth sailing. We need to be prepared for that, and we need not to get disheartened as a result of that. Any change results in some setbacks, and we need to expect that and deal with it. And in doing that, we basically have to balance patience with a sense of urgency. These things don't happen overnight, but at the same time, we cannot be complacent and allow too much time to pass before initiatives actually begin to take roots. The fourth piece is, if we're going down this path and committing to reducing isolation, we have to begin establishing some clear metrics and outcome measures and that track our progress toward our ultimate goal. PbS provides great measures. And those of you who deal with PbS, there are already measures in place that you can use in getting to those outcomes. On that path, we need to reward good behavior wherever we observe that. As success begins to emerge, as we see the use of isolation begin to decline, we need outcomes and results. And even though there might be setbacks, our outcomes need to be pretty clear, and we need to know what that future will look like. This next point is probably the most important in this slide, and that is, if we use this process to punish a staff, we're doomed to failure pretty quickly. In fact, what we need to do through this process and through any change process, we need to use the process to surface the flaws that exist in our system, in our practices, as opportunities to develop better processes. If we don't know what's wrong with us, if I'm going to the doctor and I'm going to run a series of tests to see if my health is where I want it to be, I want to know exactly what's not where it needs to be and what I need to do differently. It's the same with organizational change. We need to identify those flaws and we need to celebrate surfacing them so that we can deal with them. And again, this has appeared before and it appears again, engaging staff in the process. Engagement is the name of the game. And finally, last but not least, modeling the change that we as leaders want to see in the organization. On the executive teams, our top-tier leadership, our managers at every level of the organization must walk the talk. This cannot be preaching to the organization, this is doing it. All of our managers, frontline managers, mid-level managers need to model what we're actually trying to do in this organization. And it's also important to understand how we treat our staff directly or indirectly translates into how our staff treat our youth. This is walking the talk. We can't be treating staff one way, again, perhaps with the use of force, and then expect them to implement the changes that we want to see in the organization. Finally, the final point is that this process is not easy, but it is very doable. And in doing that, we need to take, first and foremost, we need to take care of ourselves. Next thing is we need to take care of our staff. And finally, we need to take care of our youth. And this needs to happen in this relationships too. So
the same as the adult facilities. We also had to overcome staff, the fear for safety, because staff reported that using isolation was the
adult side with our own youth-focused vision, mission, and values. Job shadowing component to it. participate in juvenile-oriented scenarios and examples. That can result considered or requested. Line staff also began to participate in more of our treatment programming and the whole treatment process in order to have a fuller picture of the youth that they work with. Finally, in training staff, we also implemented the Joint Understanding and Cooperation Program, or JUCP. The focus of this program is to show students how staff think inside of a facility and to show staff how students view their time in the facility. Staff and students first receive separate training to focus on the importance of role modeling and redirecting behaviors. Then they come together and discuss how they can reinforce each other's positive behaviors and keep each other's perspectives in mind.
We also utilize data to drive practices. We incorporated performance-based standards, or PbS, into the foundation and culture of our facilities to the point that it has become our way of doing business. We share our data with our staff, which has helped them understand the reasons behind changes we have made and continue to make. Being able to see what we're above the national average for isolation use, and especially for duration of isolation, was very impactful for our staff. Our staff could and now see how others significantly reduce the use of isolation without increasing their incidence or risk for safety. This data helped us start the conversation of what can we do, or how can we do something better. It eventually reduced the fear that reducing isolation would increase the risk to staff. Our superintendents also work different hours to meet with small groups of staff on all shifts. They show them all the PbS reports and ask for their ideas on making changes or improvements. And then those staff can directly participate in developing and meeting our facility improvement plans. We also conduct daily incident monitoring meetings. Department heads come together and discuss all incidents and uses of isolation from the day before. They review them, making sure that all our processes were in place and that staff made every effort to keep youth out of isolation with appropriate de-escalation techniques. These meetings give staff the ability to discuss reasons they might be aware of for youth behaviors or actions, and for the whole team then to work together on a plan for helping the youth. We also focus on PbS data monthly, not just during reporting months. We have a PbS facility report that each facility submits monthly with all the PbS outcome measures on it. This way we can celebrate successes on a regular basis, especially in decreasing isolation or addressing problem areas immediately. Because we are constantly measuring and reporting, PbS has also helped us recognize what is working. For example, on PbS standard order number 8, we were able to decrease our frequency and number of isolation uses by 64.7%. This represents an 85.8% decrease. Currently, the field average was 21.59 hours. While we were at 3.4 hours, that puts us 84.2% below the field average. This data shows us that the things that we have implemented have been working. We also began engaging families to help us reduce isolation. We opened up visitation days and hours to allow visits daily and at any time that is convenient for the family. Prior to this, we only offered visitation on specific days of the week and at limited times of the day. Families are able to visit multiple days and multiple times now. We implemented conference calls with families to discuss reasons for isolation. For example, if a youth is placed in isolation, we contact the family and do a family session over the phone. In this way, the youth can discuss their behaviors with their family. Staff can also talk with the family. All of them can then collaborate on strategies to help the youth make better decisions. We also increased collaborative family sessions with facility counselors and juvenile reintegration specialists, which are our juvenile parole staff. Counselors also contact families each time a student is reviewed by treatment team so that they can participate and be part of the ongoing treatment intervention. We also created several different family events at each facility. For example, we offer facility tours for families given by our facility executive staff. We have brainstorm and elicit families
with that particular staff member in the immediate area. Improving facility life. And with all these
Massachusetts. I think my you'll also have to focus on that young person's safety once they're in there. Staff throughout the are unattended to. So we spent a lot of time, I personally spent a lot of time on that. We spent a lot of time going across the agency. We did, you know, big forums. We did a lot of work at our academy. We went out and met with dozens of programs between the day and evening shift in that shift change to you know, introduce and message the policy. So some of it was done locally, but the central office leadership, the commissioner's office, did a lot of legwork and put a lot of miles on trying to make sure that people heard it from us and that we weren't passing this down lower into the organization and delegating out the message, that we were actually carrying it ourselves. And I would recommend that if you're in the process of thinking about this. Next slide, please. So the actual policy that we put together, essentially, it's about a 12-page. It's on our portal, on our website. You can pick it up. Commonwealth and Mass Department of Youth Services. It's pretty thoughtful, and the core of it is that you're able to use room confinement for the purposes of a violent situation. The
a volatile situation where a youth is being aggressive, acting out, being violent, but you are not able to use it for punishment. So we took away the ability for staff to go in after an incident and give somebody 2 days in their room for a fight. We took that away. That was the flashpoint with our union. That became, a big piece of the discussion, and it's really important. And I'm still doing this for every time this comes up to clarify. No, you can use it. We are using it across our programs. There's an appropriate use for it, if we use it correctly, it's effective. So we've struggled in the implementation of our policy over a period of years, actually, and had aggressive behavior actually go up in our system. And over the last couple of years, we're starting to see lower restraints, lower incidents involving room confinement, lower assaults of youth on staff. So we really are starting to reap the benefit of a policy improvement in this area, tough area too. Next slide, please. We started out with zero data. We had no idea today who was in their rooms yesterday, who put them there, how long they were there for, what they were there, what they were in for. We had nothing. So we really had to build a baseline, and that's what I think probably some folks that are on this call will have to do to figure out, what does that look like? How are you able to capture that? How many locations are you managing? And begin to develop a baseline so you could actually measure progress. Along the way, but are in PbS. Our average duration is the next slide. across all of our programs. Timeout. Are contemplating that because that's pretty much where the science is directing us with this group. In Massachusetts, we do DBT twice per week for every kid in every single program across the continuum. And probably the biggest breakthrough that we had on the DBT is that going back 5 or 6 years, we started to have our direct care supervisors co-facilitate the DBT groups with the licensed social workers and the clinicians. So we have 2 adults, one's a trained clinician and one's a direct care staff. And what that really helped us do was get some of the strategies that they're practicing in group applied into the residential have infractions or act up or don't comply, that we're rewarding good behavior. I know that was one of Fairbois's points. What that looks like, but getting them out is or so. And then when do you open the door? What kind of questions do you ask to gauge whether or not that youth is back under control? The ability to potentially have that youth out of their room, but not back in the day room with everybody else. You know, strategies to kind of decompress so that it's not right from the timeout in the room right into the TV room with all the other kids. And have that really be an individualized process. And staff actually, in our system, our staff are doing a really wonderful job on this piece of it. Next slide, please. So the other piece then, in Indiana talked specifically about some of the training that they're doing. You know, the national trend, and I think it's really exciting, is the adolescent brain development stuff and the science and the positive youth development construct that youth are potential assets and that they have strengths, and that to the extent that we can approach our work that way, that we're really trying to build skill and get our staff to understand that in a in a really high a lot of different trainings around, kind of the broad topics that are listed here. We're continuing to try to, engage staff through different training opportunities and use our academy as a locus for new ideas and to keep staff charged up. And the other piece that's not listed is we do, like all of you do, we also do so those are my slides, and I'm going to hand it off back to
If you're looking for a copy of the presentation, I think, I get a couple questions about what the
$500
just earlier, we run about 55 programs across the entire continuum. 26 of those programs are in secure facilities. We have a regional anchor. So we have 5 regions. So we have 6 campuses with secure programs, and then we have a whole network of community-based residential programs. Our target for each residential unit is 12. We have some programs that are as low as 10, some programs that are as high as 15. I don't believe we have any programs operating now that are over 18 youth. And our ratio on the awake shifts is 1 staff to 4 youth. And on the overnight, it's really 1 to 7, but we generally exceed that because we always have at least 3 staff on the shift, whether it's a wake shift or an overnight shift. So we have a fairly well-resourced staffing ratio here in Massachusetts.
All right.
So Brandon,
with that,
if I might just add, this is Fairbourse from Oregon. I just wanted to say that currently, and I don't know if any of the folks on the webinar have this issue as well, we currently have living units that are basically dormitory style, with the exception of just a couple of units with individual rooms. And in that environment, there is really no in-between places. If kids are misbehaving on a living unit with 25 other kids, one of the only things, especially with the staffing ratios that we have, would be to remove that kid from that living unit. We're actually building and remodeling some new living units with individual rooms. And in the one behavior unit that we have with individual room, it's a whole lot easier to ask a kid to self-regulate, go back to his or her own room, not in a locked door environment, but with the basically on their own, and then when they're ready, they can come out. In a dorm environment, you don't have that option. So I just wanted to add that tidbit, that environment
a lot of people want to know about some of the incentive programs, maybe what specific incentives. I've got a question about maybe a good incentive program or some ideas for shorter stays, detention programs, but a lot of questions about, what can we do to incentivize the good behavior? So why don't I actually start with Mark and Natalie there can you give us some examples of
and some special speakers. They can participate
where they're, we have what's called the wide try program, where it's an actual unit that used to be a separation unit that we've now converted into this intensive dorm. So they kind of have more control over, when they wake up and some of the chores, and they get these things, but their behavior has to be there. We also have a unit down in one of our female facilities where they wear a different color shirt based on, their behavior and engaging in positive behavior with the youth and staff, and also on and off the unit. So it's just knowing your population and different things that they get motivated by.
I think what's important to also add is don't rest on that subject. You constantly want to be asking the kids what they're interested in, because you get different kids all the time. So I think having a mechanism in place that you
understand that the youth are watching us to however far they earn.
Incentives, or maybe any specific incentives up? If
period of time with kids assaulting each other and
Yes, I am. Sorry about that. and where you want to. First and foremost, and then we can build on in sporting events, and I think Peter was referring to this earlier. You know, we tend to have this level system that rewards youth who are behaving really well, but some of those youth who are not behaving so well actually need some incentives in order to do better, and participating in sports and being engaged is something that really speaks to them. And then the next level of this pyramid that I'm talking about, and I mentioned this in my slides, is accountability and high expectations. This model, this culture change, has to be rooted in holding ourselves accountable as an organization and holding youth accountable. And then the next level of that is basically participating, meaningful participation. So if the youth does not own their own case plan, if staff don't own their responsibility to help youth get to a better place, we're not going to get anywhere. And finally, at the top of this pyramid is community connection. We need to be able to better connect our staff with our youth with our staff, and ultimately our youth with a bigger circle of belonging. Because especially those who are gang involved have a very small circle, and that belonging comes at the expense of hurting others. So that's been the way that we've implemented this. We'll start training staff. As Peter said, this is a multi-year process.
I was going to add to that, to what Fearboy said, and say that every single person that you hire is critically important. And where you're looking to get people to work in your agency is critically important. And we found our experience here in Massachusetts, you know, where we used to hire a lot of people that were, you know, former law enforcement officers, former correctional officers, and we still do that. There's a lot of good people in that mix, but a steady diet of that group, that's a tough group to get onto positive youth development and positive youth outcomes. So your hiring is critical, and then your basic training, your in-service training, and how you're messaging that is also critically important, so that people understand what they're getting into and what kind of support they're going to have from the agency. So I just think that front end, everybody would understand that, the front end hiring, the front end training, and then when they get to their workplace, does the training from the program or your training academy.
To call QRT. So yeah, we still have QRT, but we person off, and
really remarkable once we implemented the care teams was we heard a lot of information back from the kids, and they always said that whenever QRT teams would respond, they were automatically went into a fight mode. They knew QRT was coming to physically restrain them, so they were automatically defensive and aggressive when they responded. Once we implemented the care teams, the kids reported that they knew care team was coming to help them
a student will just ask for it. When the student knows they're getting out of hand, they'll even say, you know, I think I need to talk to somebody on care team. This is just not working for me. So that the kids learn over time that it's an option, and we give them that option.
And the ability to look at to place kids in restrictive housing, place them in isolation as a response to aggressive behaviors and acting out behaviors. They use that as a crutch. They've come to rely on that. And from a direct care staff's perspective, they truly believe at this point that the use of isolation and restrictive housing is what keeps them safe. So you have to really pay attention to staff. You have to work with them very closely and make sure that they understand that reducing the use of isolation is actually going to make them safer.
That's a good timing on that comment, Mike, because the question had just come in. What do you say to staff?
To begin to move away from that. Using the PbS data
I think all the presenters have talked about, when the youth are ready to come out of their room. So some of the questions I'm seeing are, for youth who are, we're trying to get them out of their rooms as soon as possible. What do you do for youth that are difficult to assess? They don't give you the right answers, or maybe they're not responding well to how you're asking them if they're ready to come.
The youth person is calmed down. The other thing that I would say on that, hall.
Do you guys have anything to add beyond that?
Should not be the staff.
And Brendan, just real quickly, I would also add that don't underestimate the power and the influence of the family engagement piece. I think that connecting a youth to a parent will help you get the youth re-engaged and help them to de-escalate those types of situations as well.
Well, thanks, Mike. And while you've got the floor, we've only got a few minutes left here, so why don't you go ahead and kind of wrap things up for the presentation here today.
Okay. So putting all this together, you know, in March 2015, CJCA published a toolkit reducing the use of isolation, and you can find that toolkit on our website at CJCA.net, and it'll be under the publications. The toolkit outlines 5 steps to effectively reducing the use of isolation. And those include rehabilitative mission statements and philosophies, restrictive isolation policies and procedures, data to drive the practices, alternative behavioral project, which you can find at stopsolitaryforkids.org. I want to thank Fairboards